Hey everyone, I'm Jackie from Atom Heart Cross Stitch, and this is episode 4 of my Learn to Cross Stitch video series. In this series, I'll be walking you through all the basics of cross stitch so that you can complete a project all on your own. In the last episode, we continued working through this happy heart pattern, which you can download completely for free from my website. And this was our stopping point from the last video. In this episode, we're actually gonna finish stitching this. And while we do so, we're gonna talk all about troubleshooting. So whether it's organizing your floss, fixing a mistake, or undoing a tangle, we're gonna go through all of the common pitfalls and how to get through them. So as you've been stitching along and working on your cross stitch project, you may have encountered kind of a growing pile of embroidery floss. Now, if you're like me, you're probably dealing with a kind of messy, unkempt pile, or maybe you've kept it nice and organized and you're totally cool just pulling from your skein, moving along, and keeping things clean. But if you are like me and kind of finding a mess starting to pile up, we're gonna kind of go through some of the most common ways that people like to organize their embroidery floss. Now, first to talk about our floss cards. Now, if you purchased a ready-to-go cross-stitch kit that had all of the supplies needed to make your project, you may have already encountered something similar to this. These are a really common way for kits to provide the floss that you need for a project. And they'll look a little bit different across different manufacturers and kits that you buy, but the general theory is about the same. Typically, you'll have a thick piece of cardboard that will have either the symbol or the floss number or both printed on the card next to the thread that number or symbol corresponds to. I really like these because it's typically, as long as that symbol is provided there, a really easy way to just glance down and know exactly which thread corresponds to the symbol that you're stitching. So it really kind of saves that time of having to constantly reference your symbol key. They're also really easy to just make on your own. So if you're buying the floss separately for your project, you can easily make a floss card to use at home. Essentially, you'll just want a nice piece of cardstock. You'll want to hole punch a little hole in there for your floss, and then you can just write on the floss number and symbol. The other nice thing with floss cards is you can see here, all of your threads are typically pre-cut. So when you're working with a color, you just kind of remove it from the card, pull a strand, and the strand generally is going to be cut at a pretty good starting length. Now, one of the cons of these is they really are, for the most part, project specific. So this is a way to really organize your floss for a specific project. What it's not so easy is when you have a master set of floss that you're pulling from as you stitch all of your projects. This might not be the easiest way to store, like, for example, 500 different colors of DMC embroidery floss. If you do really love this concept but want something a little bit more long-lasting than cardstock, you can go online and find similar products made out of plastic or wood. They even have some that are made out of plastic and then also have like a slot down the middle of foam where you can preload your needles with those strands of floss and just stick them in next to each corresponding color slot. But if you like to organize by project, these are a great solution. Now, perhaps the most popular of all the floss storage solutions are bobbins. Because bobbins are so popular, they are super easy to find. You can find really inexpensive ones made out of cardboard all the way up to nice, more pricier ones made out of acrylic or wood that will last a lifetime. Now, most bobbins will have a little hole on the top that you can use to place on a floss storage ring, which can be really great for organizing by project. But it's really common to see bobbins stored in boxes. These are typically slim, lightweight, easy to carry around and transport. And it's especially great when you want to organize all of your floss in one spot. Now, when you use bobbins, essentially you have your whole skein of floss just wound onto this little cutout. So when you need a new piece of floss, you would just unwind it to whichever length you like and then cut however many strands you need. In this case, I'll cut 2, remove it there, and then just wind the rest of this back onto the bobbin. Now, some of the cons when it comes to bobbins, when you have your floss wound up on something like this for a long period of time, as you unwind it, you will tend to have some kinks made in your floss. Now, this doesn't bother some people at all. Some people it does, so it just kind of depends on personal preference there. For me, even though it's a small thing, I think one of the other drawbacks is having to unwind your threads each time you want a new strand, and then kind of guess what length you want that strand of floss to be. So if you're like me and you kind of like the concept of those floss cards and having all of your lengths of thread kind of pre-cut and ready to go, but maybe it just doesn't feel perfect, you might like floss drops. Now, full disclosure, I design and sell floss drops. That's what my store, Adam Hart Cross Stitch, is primarily known for. So yes, I am biased. I love floss drops. And you can find floss drops in all shapes, sizes, colors, but essentially you'll typically have two things. One, you'll have a hole for placing them on a floss storage ring. Again, this is really great for organizing your threads by project. And then you'll have another hole somewhere else, which is for storing the actual threads. Now, again, I think the big benefit here is one, you are not going to kink your floss storing it like this. And two, you have all of your strands kind of pre-cut at a really good starting length. It's also super easy to remove one strand at a time. I just like to take my needle and wiggle it under the knot on the top of the floss drop, pull, and then you've got your strand of floss ready to go and everything else on the floss drop. Now, I think the biggest con with floss drops is really the storage. Now, for me, typically when I finish a project, any remaining floss I have, I will kind of just put into a master pile of floss drops. I keep them on these big rings and I just organize them in numerical order so it's easy to find what I need. But that's going to be a little bit messier and tangle a little bit more than if you were using something like bobbins that's in a nice and contained storage box. Now, if you are interested to learn more about floss drops, I do have a deep dive video where I talk about them at length, specifically to talking about the different styles of floss drops that I make and sell. So you can definitely go check that out if these are kind of piquing your interest a little bit. Now, if you've been stitching along with me so far and just pulling from your main skein of floss and really enjoying that process, having no issues with it, then floss-a-way bags may be a perfect solution for you. Now, I just made these ones out of Ziploc bags so that I could demo them for you. But essentially the concept here is you have a little bag that you label with your floss numbers so you know what's what, just in case any of those labels come off. And you can just throw your skein of floss into a bag. Any leftover pieces of floss, again, you just throw them in the same bag and you just keep everything nice and organized that way. A lot of times you'll see them with holes so that you can use some type of floss storage ring. And because these are already in bags, it's really easy to put them in all sorts of things to store them. You can lay them out in boxes, binders, just throw all your little bags into a bigger bag. Like, these can be a really nice solution. When I was growing up, this is always how my mom and my grandma organized their floss. Now, those are just 4 of so many different ways to organize your floss. Those are kind of what I think of as some of the more popular options. Now, if this is your first cross-stitch project, and you're loving it, which I really hope you are, and ready to do more and more and more, you'll definitely want to start thinking about how best to organize your floss. I do think it is a highly personal, subjective decision. So I would recommend, before going out and purchasing like an entire system, you just kind of start small, because your stitching style is probably going to really end up dictating which solution really ends up working best for you. So now that we've done a quick dive into some of the more common ways to organize your embroidery floss, let's keep working on our heart. As you dive into the world of cross-stitching, you may start to hear some terms thrown around that might not make sense. And if you end up making a mistake while you're stitching, like I just did here, you may run into the term frogging. Yep, frogging. Why frogging? Well, when you do make a mistake, you might have to rip out your stitches. So you'll rip it, rib it, frogging. Get it? I don't know who comes up with this stuff, but let me show you how to fix a mistake because yes, it is bound to happen. So as I am stitching along here with my orange thread, I'm going to come one stitch over too far. And now the way you tackle this is going to depend on a few things. Here, I'm noticing the mistake pretty soon after making it, right? So I still have my needle threaded with that same piece of thread that I'm working with. So what I would do in a case like this is I would remove my needle from the thread and then I would just kind of use my needle to gently unpick those stitches, bringing myself back to where I made that mistake. And this really is kind of your best case scenario. So here again, I'm able to just kind of undo that stitch. I will put my needle back onto my thread and then just continue stitching like I was. Unfortunately, though, it's not always this easy. Many times you might not notice that you made a mistake until it's way too late. In this scenario, once again, I added one stitch too many, but I'm not realizing it until after I've anchored that piece of thread. In this scenario, your best friend really is going to be a seam ripper. So here I'm going to take my seam ripper and very gently undo that incorrect stitch. You do need to be very careful with the seam ripper because you do not want to go too far and put a hole in your actual fabric. Now, in this case, again, I'm just gonna kind of use my needle again to unpick a few of the stitches. And then you could unpick enough stitches where you then have a tail that you could put on your needle and anchor. In this case, the tails that I have left over are really, really tiny. So I'm just kind of showing you a hack. So here I've taken a different piece of thread and I've just put it on my needle with the loop at the end. And then I'm going to put those short tails through that loop and then pull it through. It can be a little tight to get it done, but just kind of keep working it. And then I'm able to anchor those tails that otherwise would be way too short. At this point, I would then just start with a new strand of floss on my needle, take care of those stitches that I needed to remove, and then just continue stitching like normal with that color. And this is just my kind of general approach when it's a stitch or two. I'm sure there's other ways of doing it. You may unfortunately also run into having to remove an entire section and then having to redo it. Now, yes, you will make a mistake. And sometimes, honestly, you don't need to fix it. Now, for some people, just knowing that there's a mistake in their work is enough to drive them nuts. So they'll want to redo them and fix them no matter what. For me personally, it's a case-by-case basis. If I can kind of step away from my work, look at it from afar, and that stitch or mistake is really not going to mess up the overall look of the pattern, many times I'll leave it in there. Sometimes though, it's just a glaring mistake and no matter what you do, it's going to throw off the entire pattern to leave your error in there and you'll have no choice but to rip it out and redo it. So again, I don't think there's any hard and fast rules for when and how to fix a mistake. I really think it is a case by case basis depending on the mistake and whether you can kind of fudge around it or not. Now, have I ever gotten through a project start to finish without making a mistake? Not yet, but every time I start a new project, I feel like it might be the one where I can get through it without a single mistake, but I'll be sure to let you know if that ever happens. It has not happened yet. So another bound to occur thing that is going to happen while you are stitching is incurring a knot or a tangle. Now, in the previous episode, we did talk about some tips and tricks for avoiding tangles, like letting your thread unravel from itself, keeping your thread lengths a little bit shorter rather than longer. But even when you're using all the tips and tricks to keep your floss nice and tangle-free, you are going to eventually deal with a knot or a tangle. Now, sometimes you won't even notice that a knot happens. It will be kind of much later that you kind of feel a knot along the back of your work and you'll be wondering, gosh, how did that get there? Now, if it's already kind of been stitched over along the back, I leave that to you whether you're going to want to rip everything out or not to get to it. I have been known to just pretend like I don't see them from time to time. Generally though, it is not best practice to leave a lot of knots along the back of your work. Now, if you do have a knot on the back of your work, that could eventually kind of start to come loose, and it could affect your finished stitching on the front side as those stitches start to loosen up. The other issue with having a lot of knots along the back of your work is it could make it look kind of bumpy from the front, especially when you go to finish your project. If you're framing it, those like bumps might really show through to the front of the work. So generally, best practice is to not leave knots along the back of your work. Now, a lot of times when your thread starts to tangle or knot, you will be very aware that it is happening.
Rule number one, when you encounter a knot or a tangle forming, is to not pull it tight. I feel like 9 out of 10 times, if I take my needle and place it in the kind of loop where the knot has formed and slowly pull, so many times that will do the trick and it comes right out. If that doesn't work, however, you may be forced to just cut the knot out. It happens. If you're lucky, you'll be left with enough thread length that you can just continue stitching with that piece of thread. If not, you can use the hack that I showed you from the previous step to deal with a really short tail if you do need to cut it.
We've talked knots, tangles, mistakes, all of the things you will need to troubleshoot the problems you will likely run into as you embark on your cross-stitch journey. As we've talked through all of these things, we have continued to stitch and we have finished our happy little heart. So now you may be wondering, what do I do with this thing? That's going to be covered in the final episode of this series where I show you how to finish your cross-stitch projects. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more content like this in the future, please do all the good things, like, comment, and subscribe. If you're a beginner stitcher and have any more questions about cross-stitching, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. Friendly reminder, you can download this same pattern from this video series completely for free from my website. I do also have a page dedicated to linking to all of the supplies that I use and talk about in this video series. Stay tuned for the next episode where I will be showing you how to get from this to this. Until next time, I'm Jackie from Adam Hart Cross Stitch. Thank you so much for watching.